Bahrain's awareness of the need to confront maritime security challenges effectively and to strengthen collective responses to ensure their safety and protection. In particular, at this critical juncture when the world is witnessing an unprecedented escalation in threats targeting freedom of international navigation and the security of vital waterways. We also express our appreciation to the Secretary General and the briefers for their briefings. Madam President, the Republic of Yemen attaches great importance to the security of international navigation, stemming from our strategic location overlooking the Bab el-Mandab Strait, one of the most vital maritime passages in the world, which is a critical link between East and West, through which a significant portion of global trade and supplies of oil and liquefied natural gas transit. The developments in the Strait of Hormuz, preceded by the terrorist Houthi militias' attacks in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait, have demonstrated the extent to which these passages are sensitive to global energy security and the stability of the global economy. Any disruption in their traffic or threat to the freedom of passage is directly reflected in trade and energy supplies, essential commodities, in global economic stability, and it increases the burden on peoples around the world. This underscores the need to respect freedom of navigation in all seas, oceans, and waterways, and all of states' adherence to the Charter of the United Nations and international law, and in particular UNCLOS. Madam President, the Republic of Yemen underscores we condemn all the attacks against the Strait of Hormuz as a violation of international law and the principle of the freedom of navigation. We emphasize that any attempt by Iran to obstruct the transit and freedom of navigation is a threat to international maritime security. And accordingly, we emphasize that the security of these two vital straits is not just a regional issue, but a cornerstone of international peace and security. Accordingly, there must be a united and firm international response that guarantees the freedom of navigation and that deters any threats against them. We call on the Security Council to uphold its responsibility in the maintenance of regional and international peace and security and adopting the necessary measures to end any attempt to obstruct international navigation. Madam President, the Yemeni government has previously warned repeatedly that the threats that result from the continued support to the Iranian-supported militias and the extended conflict in Yemen and their threats against international navigation represents a threat to international and regional security. The developments have confirmed our warnings and have revealed the degree to which there is a direct link between the Houthi militias and the Iranian regime. Accordingly, Yemen stresses the importance of all member states' compliance with their obligations and the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 2216 and relevant Security Council resolutions, including the targeted arms embargo, and to hold accountable everyone who contributes to undermining the implementation of the resolutions, including the Iranian regime. We call for enhanced practical cooperation including with the government of Yemen, and the development of maritime surveillance capabilities and further cooperation to prevent the flow of weapons and military technology to the terrorist Houthi militias. We further underscore the importance of activating the role of the verification and inspection mechanism, ensuring its funding and strengthening its capacities. Madam President, the protection of vital waterways is a collective responsibility that requires a coordinated and comprehensive international response. No state alone can confront these growing threats. In this regard, we emphasize the importance of building upon the existing regional and international frameworks, including the Djibouti Code of Conduct and its Jeddah Amendment and the vital role of the Regional Maritime Information Sharing Center, which has proven its effectiveness in enhancing coordination and information sharing among coastal states, and also its effectiveness in combating maritime threats. We also stress the importance of the Security Council undertaking a more integrated and proactive role in addressing maritime threats, including through enhancing coordination between the existing international mechanisms, supporting capacity building, and ensuring the effective implementation of the relevant resolutions. In conclusion, we affirm the importance of the international community adopting a comprehensive and effective strategy that integrates national efforts with those of regional and international partners. We hope this meeting will result in a firm collective position that reflects the magnitude of the current challenges and that will adopt the necessary steps to protect freedom of international navigation and to deter violations against regional and international peace and security. Thank you, Madam President.
I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Madam President. Malta thanks the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this very timely debate. We also are grateful to the UN Secretary General, to the IMO Secretary General, and Mr. Nick Childs for their very insightful briefings. Malta aligns itself with the statements delivered by the European Union and Singapore and is making the statement in its national capacity. President, Malta is a maritime nation with a history inextricably linked to the sea. As a small island state, we are acutely aware that maritime security is not an abstract concern, nor is it a challenge confined solely to coastal regions. Disruptions to shipping routes and waterways carry wider implications for global stability, trade, and the socio-economic well-being. We observe with growing concern the developments that challenge the legal framework established by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which codifies customary international law. We recall that the Convention sets as a central objective the realization of a just and equitable international economic order for the benefit of all. Upholding its principles is inseparable from the maintenance of international peace and security. Situations affecting key maritime waterways, including in the Black Sea, the Red Sea, and the Strait of Hormuz, underscore how disruptions in the maritime domain carry broader consequences for both regional and international stability. President, at the humanitarian level, we must address the impact of actions affecting commercial shipping and those who depend on it. We reiterate our concern at incidents involving commercial vessels and the risks faced by seafarers and fishers. Let us not forget that seafarers and fishers are civilians whose service underpins global supply chains and food security. We must also insist on the protection of commercial shipping as the bedrock of the global economy. The maritime domain is also facing evolving challenges that require our collective action. Vessels operating outside established regulatory frameworks, risks to critical underwater infrastructure, and the growing use of technologies that may interfere with navigation systems, they all call for increased vigilance and international cooperation. President, maritime security should continue to be approached through cooperation and respect for international law. Recent milestones, including the entry into force of the BBNJ agreement and the Beijing Convention on the Judicial Sale of Ships, demonstrate that a multilateral approach to ocean governance is key in addressing shared challenges to our common uses of the seas. At the same time, it is evident that much remains to be done. The scale and complexity of current risks highlight the importance of sustained international engagement. First, we must reaffirm UNCLOS as the constitution of the seas. Preserving and upholding its principles is essential for maintaining global peace and security. The international community can ill afford to relinquish the stability and predictability that this framework guarantees. Otherwise, we risk a return to an era of maritime uncertainty, reversing decades of hard-won progress and cooperation. Second, Malta underlines that maritime security is a matter of direct relevance to the United Nations Security Council in the context of its responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, particularly where maritime threats affect global and regional stability. The Security Council's attention is therefore essential to address evolving risks and to promote coordinated responses. In conclusion, Madam President, we reaffirm that the safety and security of the maritime domain underpin global trade and economic resilience. Ultimately, maritime security is global security. Without one, we cannot have the other. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. Today's topic is of high priority for Turkey. Being positioned at a region that is essential to global trade and energy routes, Turkey, as a maritime country, places utmost importance to maritime security, freedom of navigation, open sea lines of communication, and the rule of law at sea. Preserving freedom of navigation and ensuring the peaceful use of seas and oceans remain primary objectives of Turkey. Turkey actively participates in joint operations against maritime piracy, armed robbery, and terrorism. We see regional cooperation as complementary to multilateral efforts. Turkey is uniquely positioned at the crossroads of Black Sea, Aegean, and the Mediterranean, a region that is essential to global trade and energy routes. The Turkish straits connect continents and carry a significant portion of global maritime traffic. Turkey takes every step in ensuring safe and secure passage of vessels through these waterways. The regime of passage through the Turkish straits is regulated by the Montreux Convention, which establishes a political and military balance in the Black Sea between the littoral and non-littoral countries since 1936. Turkey will continue to implement the convention strictly, transparently, and impartially, which has been the case for the last 90 years. We continuously invest in advanced traffic monitoring systems, search and rescue capabilities, and maritime surveillance to ensure maritime safety and protect all ships and seafarers. Turkey believes that ensuring freedom of navigation and maritime security is an international effort requiring constant collaboration among states. However, current state of conflict in our region and the complexities regarding the Strait of Hormuz have reminded the whole world of the critical importance of freedom of navigation. Turkey has been making intensive efforts to reach and maintain a ceasefire and to achieve the escalation through dialogue and diplomacy. The joint initiatives launched by Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia played a significant role in paving the way for the success of negotiations. Unfortunately, the situation had severe repercussions, including naval safety and maritime security, mostly linked to the blockage in the Strait of Hormuz. Multilateral efforts aimed at preserving stability and ensuring maritime safety in the Strait of Hormuz are crucial. In this regard, diplomatic efforts should be prioritized to address the root causes of the issue. Restoring freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz in accordance with international law and long-standing practices should be a top priority for the whole international community. Hormuz is a natural maritime gateway. It should not be used as a geopolitical tool in dispute resolution. Attempts to impose new restrictions to the legal status of the strait or establish a new order are unrealistic, unacceptable, and run contrary to the international law. Turkey remains fully committed to playing its part in this process. At this point, I wish to place on record that Turkey is not a party to the UNCLOS and has consistently expressed that it does not agree with the view that UNCLOS has a universal and a unified character. We also maintain that UNCLOS is not the only legal framework which regulates all activities in the oceans and seas. These concerns and objections have also been raised by a number of other states throughout the years. The Convention does not provide sufficient safeguards for particular geographical situations and, as a consequence, does not take into consideration conflicting interests and sensitivities stemming from special circumstances. Turkey, therefore, disassociates herself from the references made to UNCLOS, which cannot be construed as binding on all states. Resolving maritime boundary issues in line with international law, the principle of equity, and the relevant jurisprudence is essential and contributes to the freedom of navigation. Likewise, exploitation of hydrocarbon resources must fully respect the legitimate and inherent rights of all relevant peoples and parties. Refraining from unilateral actions and avoiding maximalist positions are key to fostering stability and cooperation. Our vision for our region is to be one of stability and prosperity, where maritime jurisdiction areas are equitably delimited, hydrocarbon resources are shared fairly, freedom of navigation and peaceful use of seas and oceans are ensured. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Seychelles.
Mr. President, I would like to thank the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this important debate on maritime security. The Republic of Seychelles is a small island state, but also a large ocean nation. We are the guardians of 1.4 million square kilometers of the Western Indian Ocean. We have spearheaded the development of the blue economy and maritime security in our region because we believe that the protection of the maritime heritage of humankind, economic development, and security mutually reinforce one another. Seychelles hosts the leading center for cooperation in multinational maritime operations, and we are a strong supporter of the regional maritime security architecture led by the Indian Ocean Commission. We are deeply committed to the rule of law at sea, and we urge consistent respect for international law. Freedom of navigation remains a fundamental right of all states and must not be weaponized to the detriment of states that rely heavily on maritime routes. Mr. President, like other small island states, restrictions on freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz have significantly affected our economy. Rising fuel prices and supply chain disruptions threaten our economic well-being. Maritime security and freedom of navigation are a shared global responsibility. We urge all parties to work towards a negotiated, sustainable, and implementable solution with the support of the Security Council. However, the Council must also look beyond the current emergency. The UN needs a more strategic approach to maritime security. Our response to maritime security issues cannot be reactive. Evolving threats require continued prioritization by the Council for the security and prosperity of all. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Seychelles for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Madam President. South Africa welcomes the convening of this timely high-level open debate under the theme Maintenance of International Peace and Security, and on specifically maritime security. We thank the distinguished briefers for sharing their valuable insights. President, we wish to express South Africa's concern with the escalating tensions in the Gulf region, which has negatively impacted the global economy, including in the African continent, where the cost of energy, fertilizers, seeds, and other agricultural inputs has increased considerably, threatening agricultural production and the sustenance of livelihoods. We recall in this regard that the international community finds itself in this situation due to an unprovoked and destructive conflict that began with illegal and unjustified attacks against Iran that has resulted in incalculable harm. South Africa was encouraged by the declaration of a ceasefire and encourages the continuation of mediation efforts to find a comprehensive, peaceful and lasting solution. Madam President, Israel's ongoing illegal attacks against Lebanon amid a ceasefire must be condemned. We should not once again be condoning Israeli impunity. In this context, there must be respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the affected countries in the region by all parties concerned, in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. Furthermore, South Africa reaffirms that maritime security, freedom of navigation, the protection of the maritime environment, and the safety and security of seafarers are fundamental principles of international law, as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. These principles are not discretionary, but are binding obligations that must always be respected by all states. While some countries may have only signed and not ratified the Convention on the Law of the Sea, their expressed intention by way of signature and the devastating effects that the closure of the strait has brought about should weigh on them to reconsider their positions and strive for a solution for the greater good of humanity. Disruptions to critical waterways threaten not only global trade and energy flow, but also undermine economic stability and the delivery of humanitarian assistance. In this regard, South Africa would like to underscore the following 3 points. Seafarers must never become victims of geopolitical tensions. Their safety, dignity, and welfare must remain paramount. Secondly, freedom of navigation and the right of innocent passage must be fully respected, and vessels must be allowed safe and unhindered transit through international waterways. And thirdly, escalatory actions and breaches of international law must cease, as they endanger lives, disrupt global supply chains, and damage the marine environment. Madam President, South Africa further emphasizes the importance of strict adherence to established maritime safety frameworks established under the International Maritime Organization. We reiterate our strong support for the organization and the leadership of its Secretary General in promoting coordination, information sharing, and practical responses to maritime risks, including the traffic separation scheme and the seafarer evacuation corridor. We call on all member states to support the IMO's mandate and refrain from actions that undermine maritime safety and security. Peaceful seas are the lifeblood of global prosperity. Protecting them is shared responsibility. Finally, Madam President, South Africa calls on all stakeholders to exercise maximum restraint, prioritize de-escalation, and recommit to the peaceful resolution of disputes based on international legal principles, including the UN Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam President. Cyprus aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. We would also want to add some remarks in our national capacity. First of all, we would like to thank Bahrain for its initiative to convene this important debate today. The Strait of Hormuz remains a strategic lifeline, an essential artery for global energy flows and maritime trade. Security of the strait is directly linked to international economic stability. Cyprus reiterates its strong solidarity with our Gulf partners and Jordan, and its commitment to working closely with them in safeguarding this critical waterway. We welcome the extension of ceasefires across the region as crucial steps towards restoring stability. As a maritime nation with a significant commercial fleet and in its current capacity as the presidency of the Council of the European Union, Cyprus has placed maritime security as well as engagement with the wider region of the Gulf among its core priorities. Recent developments only reinforce the urgency of sustained, coordinated action. Restoring safe, orderly and predictable navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is a shared responsibility. It requires continuous engagement, aligned messaging, and concrete action. The protection of vessels and seafarers in coordination with the IMO must remain central to our efforts. We reaffirm the importance of full respect for international law as reflected in UNCLOS, which is binding on all states irrespective of whether they acceded to the Convention. In particular, the principles of freedom of navigation and safe passage, as well as relevant Security Council resolutions, notably UN Security Council Resolution 2817. Cyprus supports ongoing EU maritime security efforts, including Operation Atalanta and Operation Aspides, which contribute to enhancing maritime domain awareness and reinforcing the security of vessels and crews. We also welcome the UN Task Force initiative as a practical and forward-looking mechanism. By focusing on verification, de-risking, and facilitating essential maritime flows, including fertilizers, humanitarian aid, and essential supplies, it offers a credible pathway to de-escalation. Cyprus stands ready to support its operationalization in concrete terms. Madam President, before us is an international challenge requiring international solution. Cyprus remains committed to advancing practical cooperation to ensure secure sea lanes, protect global trade, and promote regional and international stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Cyprus for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Fathi Ahmed Idris, Permanent Observer of the African Union to the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council. At the outset, allow me to commend the Kingdom of Bahrain for its able leadership of the Security Council during the month of April 2026. I would also like to express appreciation to the distinguished briefers at the outset of this session for their insightful presentations. This meeting would have been important and significant in all times. However, at this particular time, it is a global wake-up rescue call. In the midst of people dying in war, economies suffocating under critical maritime straits siege, and the world drifting into uncharted chaotic perils. The African Union welcomes the convening of this highly timely and so important open debate on maritime security under the severely threatened agenda item, maintenance of international peace and security. At a time when maritime security has emerged as a defining challenge for international peace and security and for the global sustainable development, recent developments across key global maritime routes underscore the increasing interconnection between geopolitical tensions, geoeconomics, and global stability. Madam President, Excellencies, the geostrategic position of Africa, bordered by key maritime routes linking the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, places the continent and its peoples at the heart of global maritime dynamics. From the Gulf of Guinea to the Horn of Africa, and from the Mediterranean Sea to the Cape of Good Hope, African waters are both vital corridors and areas of vulnerability. Addressing maritime insecurity in these regions, including wartime, piracy, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, as well as different forms of transnational organized crime, is essential. Not only for Africa, but not only for Africa's blue economy and food security, but also for global stability and well-being. The critical escalating situation in the Strait of Hormuz illustrates the fragility of maritime security. And I would like to recall the statement of His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, calling for escalation and denouncing the escalation in the Gulf region and the attacks which the Gulf countries are suffered from. Rising tensions and military actions have distributed navigation in one of the world's most critical transit routes, disproportionately affecting developing economies, particularly in Africa. At the same time, insecurity in Bab el-Mandab has compounded these challenges, multiplying transit times and costs. The Suez Canal, another vital artery of global trade, has been impacted by regional instability, highlighting the vulnerability of maritime checkpoints. These developments are not isolated, but part of a broader pattern in which strategic waterways are increasingly exposed to geopolitical competition. For Africa, the implications are acute and dire, particularly for African small island developing states whose economies are highly dependent on maritime connectivity. The African continent relies on maritime transport for over 90% of its imports and exports. Disruptions in shipping routes translate into higher food and fuel prices, jeopardizing food and energy security, compounded by constrained access to fertilizers, increasing economic vulnerability. In this vein, it's worth recognizing and commending the UNSG for his initiative to ensure the passage of fertilizers to developing countries, especially Africans, to avoid catastrophic consequences to agricultural production. Madam President, Excellencies, the African Union reiterates its unwavering commitment to the UN Charter, the principles of international law, and the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, enshrining the fundamental principles of freedom of navigation. Maritime spaces must remain global commons, safeguarded from unilateral actions that threaten stability and disrupt international trade, threatening lives and livelihoods of peoples around the world. In this regard, the African Union calls for the de-escalation of tensions in the Gulf region. Dialogue and diplomacy must prevail over force and confrontation. Madam President, to conclude, maritime security requires a comprehensive approach encompassing political, economic, and security dimensions grounded in respect of international law, territorial integrity of countries, and the peaceful resolution of disputes in conformity with the instruments that constitutes the global code of conduct, the UN Charter, and the international law, which are the basis of our presence here. The African Union stands ready to work with the United Nations and the international partners to advance a cooperative and inclusive maritime security architecture that ensures safe sea lanes, stable trade, and shared prosperity for the people of Africa and the whole world. I thank you very much, Madam President. Shukran.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Idris for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam President. Malaysia congratulates Bahrain on assuming the presidency of the Council for April 2026. We welcome the convening of an open debate on this important and timely topic. We thank the Secretary General and the briefers for their insights, and Malaysia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the Philippines on behalf of ASEAN. The oceans and maritime routes are the lifelines to global trade, connectivity, and economic development. For Malaysia, as a maritime nation, the safety and security of these waterways are of paramount importance to both regional stability and global prosperity. Recent developments have shown how disruptions in one maritime region can swiftly reverberate across the international system with far-reaching consequences. Such challenges highlight the reality that no state is immune to their impact. Malaysia underscores that lasting peace, stability, and security at sea must be grounded firmly in international law. In this regard, Malaysia views national sovereignty, sovereign rights, and territorial integrity as enshrined in the UN Charter and the relevant international law, including UNCLOS, as fundamental to safeguarding regional and global maritime security. No state, whether large or small, should be coerced under any pretext to cede its sovereignty, sovereign rights, or territory. The principle of sovereign equality must be upheld at all times. Malaysia further reaffirms the importance of maintaining maritime safety and security as well as freedom of navigation and overflight in accordance with international law, consistent with the UN Charter, and as reflected in UNCLOS and the relevant standards and recommended practices of the IMO. Continued adherence to these international legal instruments and frameworks is essential to addressing evolving threats to international navigation, global trade, and the resilience of supply chains. Malaysia attaches great importance on close and practical cooperation with neighboring states to safeguard maritime security. In this regard, initiatives such as the Malacca Straits Patrol and the Trilateral Cooperative Arrangement exemplify how sustained coordination, real-time information sharing, and intelligence exchange can deliver tangible results, including a significant reduction in maritime security incidents. Madam President, the Security Council bears the primary responsibility under the Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security. In this regard, Malaysia emphasizes the need to further promote and strengthen international cooperation to safeguard maritime safety and security. Any further disruptions to these vital arteries, particularly in situations of conflict and instability that carry serious implications for global trade, economic stability, and maritime security, must be avoided. Malaysia strongly underscores that there should be no disruptions that could have significant implications for trade, regional stability, and the overall security of maritime routes. In conclusion, Malaysia calls on all states to resolve disputes through peaceful means, make avail of diplomacy and dialogue, and to fully respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malaysia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President. Ireland aligns with the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union and adds the following in a national capacity. Safe, secure and open maritime navigation is the backbone of the global economy and a cornerstone of international stability. As the world faces an increasingly challenging and contested security environment, Ireland recognises that what happens in one part of the ocean can have a profound effect the world over. The recent closure of the Strait of Hormuz has caused significant negative impacts to the global economy, contributing to fuel price increases and shortages of fuel, critical raw materials and fertilisers. The impacts of this are felt globally, but most particularly by vulnerable communities around the world that are least equipped to deal with the fallout. When maritime waterways are safe, predictable and governed by internationally agreed rules, trade flows and economies prosper. When restricted, the impacts are felt far beyond the sea. It is therefore in our shared interest that the freedoms of the high seas are respected by all, and as affirmed by the EU, this is non-negotiable. President, Ireland stresses that in accordance with customary international law, as reflected in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the doctrine of freedom of navigation on the high seas and the rule of transit passage through straits used for international navigation cannot be deviated from. These are foundational rules and underpin the global economy. The exercise of these rules ensures that vital global waterways remain open and free and provides predictability and stability for maritime operations and international commerce. We condemn the actions of Iran in preventing lawful transit passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Ireland recalls that UNCLOS establishes a legal order for the seas and oceans, which facilitates international trade and communication, and which promotes the peaceful uses of the seas and oceans. We emphasise the universal and unified character of UNCLOS and reaffirm that the Convention sets out the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. Ireland calls on all states that have not yet ratified or acceded to UNCLOS to consider doing so now. President, Ireland is an island nation with an exclusive economic zone of over 6 times our land area. Earlier this year, we published our first National Maritime Security Strategy, which focuses on risks and threats to Ireland's national security and defence in the maritime domain. Support for international law, strengthening regional partnerships, stronger bilateral relations with neighbours, and increasing international cooperation are key actions of this strategy. This reflects Ireland's recognition that the ocean is a global common good and that we must work together to ensure a secure and stable legal order for the seas, which will contribute to the realisation of a just and fair international order. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sri Lanka.
Madam President, at the outset, let me thank Bahrain for convening this timely high-level open debate. As an island nation located at the crossroads of major shipping routes in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka places priority on maritime security. The stability of our economy is deeply dependent on maritime trade. Disruptions to key maritime corridors have shown how quickly shocks travel through the global economy. As a country heavily reliant on global trade and economic linkages and its migrant workforce, Sri Lanka remains hopeful that navigation routes will soon return to normalcy. For developing nations like Sri Lanka, the implications are immediate and trigger uncertainties among all sectors in the country. Therefore, maritime security is essential to our existence. The threats are serious and varied. Each weakens the maritime order on which global trade depends. Madam President, route disruptions dry up shipping costs, delay deliveries, and strain the budgets of developing economies already operating on thin margins. For Sri Lanka, the pressures are felt directly. Supplies vital for Sri Lanka's stability and development, including fertilizer, petroleum imports, the raw materials for our industries, and the food that feeds our population, all move through these waterways. International law, including UNCLOS, establishes clear rules in this regard. We express our expectation that the free movement of vessels carrying energy, goods, and other essential services will be entrusted, thereby safeguarding the lives and livelihoods of the people across the globe. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sri Lanka for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Namibia.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, Namibia thanks you for convening this critical debate. As a coastal nation on the South Atlantic, Namibia views the safety and protection of waterways as a fundamental not only to global commerce but to international peace and security. Maritime routes are the arteries of the global economy. Their safety is a matter of economic survival, food security, and sovereign dignity, while their disruption, whether through conflict, coercion, or criminal activity, carries consequences far beyond any single country or region. In this regard, Namibia expresses deep concern over the growing politicization and militarization of maritime spaces. Waterways must not be used to advance unilateral political agendas, enforce economic coercion beyond internationally agreed frameworks, or for geopolitical rivalry. The sea must remain a domain governed by law, not by power. The obstruction, militarization, and selective restriction of maritime routes undermines the principles of sovereign equality, freedom of navigation, and the collective interest of the international community. We want to stress clearly that the seas are a shared global commons, not a theater for coercion. Namibia also remains concerned by enduring and interconnected threats, including piracy, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, trafficking in persons, arms and narcotics, and attacks on maritime infrastructure. For Namibia, these challenges are exacerbated by limited capacity and resources, and when geopolitical tensions spill into maritime domains, further destabilizing already vulnerable regions. Addressing these threats requires genuine multilateralism. We call for strengthened cooperation grounded in mutual respect, non-interference, and adherence to international law. In this context, Namibia reaffirms the centrality of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea as the legal foundation for maritime order and maritime governance, which must be fully respected by all states. As a member of the Zone of Peace and Cooperation of the South Atlantic ZOPACAS, Namibia continues to play an active and responsible role in safeguarding the stability of the South Atlantic by contributing to maritime domain awareness, coastal and offshore patrol operations, and the prevention of transnational maritime threats. Madam President, Namibia further emphasizes that maritime insecurity anywhere is a threat to stability in all its dimensions everywhere. Developing countries continue to face significant capacity constraints in securing their maritime domains. Without meaningful support in surveillance, enforcement, and institutional development, these vulnerabilities will persist. It is imperative that the international community strengthens support for coastal states through technology transfer, training, and equitable partnerships. Namibia also highlights the critical link between maritime security and sustainable development. The exploitation of maritime resources, especially through illegal fishing, not only undermines national economies, but also fuels instability and inequality. Protecting waterways must therefore go hand in hand with protecting livelihoods and ecosystems. Namibia reaffirms that the safety of waterways is a collective responsibility and should not be compromised by narrow interest or unilateral actions. The burden of geopolitical tensions must not be shifted onto those least equipped to bear it. We call on all member states to act with restraint, resist the normalization of actions that turn maritime commons into arenas of rivalry and ensure that they remain zones of cooperation, not confrontation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Namibia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Chile would like to thank the Bahrainian presidency for convening this open debate. We also thank the Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his briefing and Arsenio Dominguez and Nick Childs for their valuable contributions. As a maritime country open to international trade, Chile notes with profound concern the impact of threats on critical waterways, the threats on critical waterways have on global stability. Disruptions to transit through strategic routes don't only affect regional security, they also give rise to systemic consequences affecting supply chain, driving up the cost of essential goods and disproportionately affecting developing countries. In this context, the security of waterways is inseparable from global energy, food, and economic security. In light of these challenges, it is essential to take practical steps to mitigate the risks in the maritime domain. We believe it's essential to build international cooperation, to improve information exchange, to build states' capacities, particularly for those states with greater limitations, to protect their waterways and respond to emerging threats. In addition, it's essential to guarantee safe conditions for navigation, including by protecting crews and merchant ships. In this context, Chile underscores that international law provides a clear, robust framework for maritime governance. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea establishes the norms applicable to navigation, including the right of transit passage through straits used by international navigation. Respect for this norm is essential to ensuring the stability of the international system. The Security Council has a central role to play here. Its action should contribute to preventing escalations, promoting respect for international law, and boosting global efforts in maritime safety. For this reason, it is necessary to move towards a more integrated, forward-looking approach to anticipate risks, address the underlying causes of tension, and enhance coordination with regional and specialized organizations. Chile further believes that the Council can play a relevant role in promoting permanent solutions, supporting initiatives that contribute to the long-term stability of sea lanes in close cooperation with states and other relevant actors. Madam President, Chile would like to clearly reiterate its position. As we have previously noted before this Council and in other multilateral fora, freedom of navigation and the right of transit passage must be respected at all times. No state can obstruct these sea lanes, since such action is incompatible with international law and undermines global stability. In this context, we underscore that any attempt to restrict or condition transit through international waterways, particularly at choke points for global trade, is unacceptable and must be addressed urgently by the international community. Finally, in a context of increasing interdependence, the protection of waterways is a collective responsibility. Chile reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism, the respect for international law, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. We call on all parties to promote dialogue and cooperation to address the challenges in the maritime domain. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Montenegro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Montenegro aligns itself with the EU statement and wishes to make a few remarks in its national capacity. We thank Bahrain for convening today's debate and for putting a much-needed spotlight on maritime security, which is of key importance for global peace, sustainable development, and economic resilience. Disruption to maritime trade is not localized, but has far-reaching and devastating global consequences. It is a threat to international peace and security, putting the prosperity and safety of all countries at risk, and impacting disproportionately the world's poorest and most vulnerable. Strengthening maritime security requires multilateral action based on international law and the UN Convention on the Law of the sea. It is of utmost importance to maintain a strong and effective international architecture for maritime security, with particular regards to specialist bodies such as the IMO. International efforts to protect maritime security are required to safeguard open and well-functioning trade routes. Continued discussion on this topic in the Security Council is therefore crucial. Mr. President, We particularly highlight the importance of keeping waterways open and secure in the Strait of Hormuz. Freedom of navigation through the strait is a cornerstone of global security and prosperity that benefits all states. Tolling, obstruction, or closure of the strait is unlawful and unacceptable under international law. In that context, and having in mind the broad support, we believe that the full implementation of the Resolution 2817 is essential and welcome efforts in this vein. We strongly support the joint initiative of the UK and France on the Strait of Hormuz and commend their leadership to facilitate engagement and support of allies and partners to safeguard freedom of navigation through the strait. We aligned with the joint statement of the leaders and stand ready to contribute to the overall efforts of allies and partners in line with our capacities to ensure unconditional, unrestricted, and immediate reopening of this vital trade waterway which handles a large share of global oil and food. Mr. President, Montenegro reiterates its full support for international cooperation to address maritime challenges and stands ready to continue contributing to this effort at sea through dialogue and in partnerships. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Montenegro for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Maldives.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you, President. I thank Bahrain, the President of the Council, for convening this open debate. The Maldives aligns itself with the statements of the OIC and NAM. For the Maldives, the ocean is not an abstract space. It's our lifeline, our security, and our economy. The daily well-being of our people depends on safe, secure, and open sea lanes. When maritime routes are threatened by conflict, unlawful interference, or rising instability, the consequences reach our islands immediately. The Maldives is therefore extremely concerned by the worsening state of maritime security. Attacks on commercial vessels, interference with navigation, and heightened tensions in critical waterways are disrupting global supply chains with growing frequency. These shocks do not remain at sea. They move quickly into fuel prices, cost of food, freight delays, and economic uncertainty, especially for the vulnerable states. What begins as instability in the distant waterway is soon felt in the daily lives of our people. This is why developments in the Strait of Hormuz are of particular concern. The Maldives calls for the restoration and preservation of safe, secure, and unimpeded navigation through the Strait of Hormuz in accordance with international law. This waterway is vital to global trade and energy flows and regional connectivity. Any prolonged disruption there carries serious consequences for international peace and security. In this regard, the Maldives recognizes the legitimate concerns of Gulf states, particularly Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, for whom the safe and uninterrupted passage of maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains closely linked to economic stability, energy security, and wider regional connectivity. The three principles must therefore remain paramount. First, respect for international law. The United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea provides the legal foundation for the peaceful use of ocean and for the rights and freedom of navigation upon which all states depend. Second, enhance international cooperation. Maritime threats are transnational by character, and they demand coordinated responses, stronger information sharing, and sustained capacity building, especially for developing countries with limited means and vast marine responsibilities. Third, the protection of maritime routes is a shared responsibility. The safety and security of waterways sustain global trade, connectivity, and economic stability. Safeguarding them is therefore a shared responsibility of all states. For small island developing states, our responsibilities at sea often exceed the resources available to us. The Maldives continues to strengthen its national maritime capabilities, including surveillance and monitoring across our EEZ. Yet the scale of today's challenge makes it clear that national efforts alone will not be enough. Partnerships, practical support, and international solidarity remains essential. The ocean connects us all our nations. The safety and security of oceans are inseparable from our shared future. We must therefore preserve the integrity of our waterways, uphold the rule of law, and ensure that the maritime domain remains a space for peace, stability, and cooperation, for it is our shared responsibility. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Maldives for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Dominican Republic.
Señor Presidente.
President, the Dominican Republic thanks the Kingdom of Bahrain for convening this timely and important debate on the safety and protection of waterways in the maritime domain. As a small island developing state lying in the heart of the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic grants the highest importance to the safety, stability, and openness of international waterways. Our economic resilience, food security, and energy supply depend directly on the safe and uninterrupted flow of maritime trade. President, the current scenario exposes us to systemic risks at the main maritime choke points. Threats to the safety of navigation, including piracy, illicit trafficking, attacks on merchant ships, and disruptions in straits and strategic routes, as well as the use of force or the adoption of coercive measures against civilian vessels in international transit, all represent an unacceptable escalation that jeopardize international peace and security. For countries such as ours, temporary interruptions to waterways can have disproportionate economic and humanitarian consequences, affecting supply chains, driving up costs, and limiting access to essential goods. In this regard, we clearly underscore and reaffirm that the protection of navigation must be firmly grounded in international law, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, as the comprehensive legal framework that regulates the rights and obligations of states at sea. Indeed, respect for the principles of the law of the sea, such as freedom of navigation, the right of transit passage through straits, and innocent passage, are essential to guarantee predictability, stability, and legal certainty at sea. We further underline the importance and relevance of specific legal regimes applicable to certain international waterways that guarantee their neutrality in accordance with international law. Mr. President, addressing developments in the circumstances surrounding maritime security demands stronger international cooperation because no state can address these challenges alone. In this context, it's essential to promote regional cooperation, including the exchange of information and joint initiatives, particularly in regions such as the Caribbean. In addition, we must strengthen multilateral coordination, including within the framework of the UN, to ensure effective responses to emerging risks. Likewise, it is essential to take steps in environmental prevention to guarantee the protection of the marine environment as the foundation for sustainable development. Mr. President, the Security Council plays a key role in maintaining international peace and security, including through protecting maritime safety and freedom at sea. In this context, we call for further efforts to promote respect for international law and cooperation to address these threats. The Dominican Republic reiterates its commitment to work with the international community to guarantee safe, open waterways that are protected for us all. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of